A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 90. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, who hopefully isn't as stuffed up in the nose as I am, John Llewellyn. How's it going?
I'm doing well. Is that like I don't know how I'm supposed to react to that. I was gonna go, well, I'm stuffed up somewhere, but that's horrible.
Yeah, I don't know.
And now saying that's horrible, I also actually said it. So
I was listening to my own voice.
I'm doing fine. I took my allergy meds this morning. I'm good.
Yeah, I think I forgot last night, and I'm paying the price. I'm like, it's in my nose. Sounds incredibly plugged.
Oh.
Anyway, so what's up? What's up, Star Wars wise? Are you thinking about Star Wars?
Well, I saw Valerian.
You saw Valerian.
I did see Valerian. That is not. Well, that is related to Star Wars.
Well,
let's get
right into that, though. I mean, you talked about this, and it's like, it's. I don't go to a lot of movies, so I'm terrible when it comes to.
Well, I don't either. And so the fact, I don't go to the movies a lot either. But so as I mentioned, I think in the previous episode, I am now in Tampa, Florida. So I moved. The move process was such a headache for us at like every step of the way, including moving in and having, our apartment ready for us. And so it was such a headache that the apartment complex, the people who run it, gave my wife and I a gift card to go to the movies. And it's one of these, Alamo Drafthouse was my experience in Austin, but they have different kinds of these places all over where they have a menu. You can order food and eat a meal while you're watching a movie at the theater. This one is called Cinebistro. There are several of them around the country, whereas Alamo Drafthouse is more like pizza and burgers and sandwiches and, fries and popcorn and all that kind of stuff. Cinebistro, it's more like steak and a nice piece of fish or pasta or, things like that. So it's a little more, I don't know, upscale is the word, but the price point's a little higher. So they gave us a gift card to go there. And they were like, and when they gave it to us, they were like, oh, Spider-Man's in theaters this weekend. And I was like, yeah, I don't think my wife would want to see that, but I know what she will want to see, and that is Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets. And that is not a joke. I knew she would want to go see that because she loves the movie The Fifth Element, which is from Luc Besson, the same writer director, which is also hilarious in its own way, because when we started dating, my wife was like, yeah, you're getting to know each other. She's like, yeah, I'm not really into science fiction. I was like, all right, that's fine. We can like different things. And then not long after that, she was like, oh, I love Futurama. My favorite character is the robot. And I was like, so you don't like science fiction, but you like this show that is incredibly science fiction-y, and your favorite character on that show isn't any of the humans, it's the robot. And she was like, yeah. And then even a little bit later, she was like, I love The Fifth Element. And I was like, all right, I have to stop you again. You say you know like science fiction, but you love The Fifth Element. She was like, yeah. So she loves The Fifth Element. So we went to go see Valerian. I went in, and it's I guess it is considered to have bombed in the box office. Reviews are mixed, to be generous. I'll just start off by saying I actually really liked it. I really liked the movie. I went in though with the expectation that, kind of like The Fifth Element, that this was going to be kind of a crazy mess of a movie, and it's not really. It's a lot less of a mess than I expected and maybe even wanted. So the difference between, one of the differences between Fifth Element and Valerian is that Valerian, there's less humor in it, or at least the humor that's in it is a lot drier than Fifth Element. Like Fifth Element is more over the top in many different ways, both kind of the sense of humor, but then also the costumes. Like clearly, you're not going to get much more over the top costume wise than Fifth Element. But it really seems like Luc Besson was trying to not exactly recreate the Valerian comic, but like stay a little truer to like, all right, I'm going to make a normal movie out of this comic because he likes the comic so much. So Valerian, for those of you who are now listening to 90 episodes of a Star Wars podcast and are unfamiliar, Valerian was one of the big inspirations for George Lucas when he was making Star Wars. It was one of the big inspirations design-wise. Valerian and Laureline's ship looks a whole lot like the Millennium Falcon, just without the bite taken out of it, essentially. And if you look online, if you Google it, someone, I don't know, a year or two ago posted something on Gizmodo or IO9 or one of those websites, basically showing like, oh, here are things that were taken directly from Valerian and put into Star Wars. So there's even one of the Valerian strips or books where he and Laureline are Valerian is dressed kind of a whole lot like Han Solo is dressed in A New Hope, things like that. So it was a big influence on George Lucas design-wise. And so I ended up kind of watching the movie Valerian, thinking about Star Wars a whole lot, both in that sense, but then also, and this is kind of one of the reasons I think I like it, and maybe this is giving me a more favorable impression of others, and I don't even know why this gives me such a favorable impression, but I feel like Valerian is a movie that George Lucas would have loved, like both as a child and like today. Like George Lucas would have loved this movie. In some ways, I think, especially with the prequels, like this is kind of the movie that George Lucas was trying to make in some ways, only it's done a lot better. You don't have like super clunky writing. You don't have like a 20-minute set piece of, like the droid factory that just kind of stuck in the movie just because he wanted to put it in there. Like in terms of building this kind of digital world, right? Because I mean, there is a lot of green screen in this movie. Whole characters, alien races. It's like, all right, you're purely a digital creation, and it looks like it, but it just looks a lot better than it did in the prequels when they would try to do the same thing. And so it's gotten knocked for the dialogue not being super great. The main characters aren't, super interesting. That's true. But it kind of doesn't matter in this movie. Like it just feels like it's more of those kind of, it's based on a comic book, right? It's an adventure story with these two characters kind of, involved in this futuristic world, with crazy technology and aliens all over the place, and them trying to complete their mission and essentially save this race of the aliens. So I thought it was kind of fun. It looks really good. I think it's probably meant to be seen in 3D, which is not how I saw it, because there are some scenes where like, oh, this is essentially the 2017 version of, was it House of Wax, or what was that 3D movie where they're like the very first 3D movie ever made, where like there's just a scene of someone walking down the street with one of those like ball and paddle things, and then they Polaroided at the audience, and look what we can do now with this technology. there are a couple scenes like that in Valerian that it's not distracting if you don't see it in 3D, but you can just clearly tell, like, oh, this was clearly designed for like a 3D experience. But yeah, I thought it was super fun, and it clearly was influenced by the prequels in some way, in the sense that, I mean, this is kind of the movie that George Lucas maybe not even was trying to make, but like, this is the kind of movie that he was making the prequels so that other directors could make movies like Valerian, right? Like, part of making the prequels, I think, not only to finish telling the story of, Anakin Skywalker or whatever, but it was also like, look, we need to start moving filmmaking and this kind of science fiction, fantasy, action movie making into this digital world, because that is easier on some levels, and that's, where the technology is headed. And so, the prequels in that sense were kind of a walk, George Lucas walked so that others might run, in some ways. And so this is an example of that, this is like, you can pretty much draw a direct line between the prequels and this movie. Not that you can't for other movies. I mean, certainly like Avatar, you could also, but, given Valerian's history as an influence on George Lucas and on Star Wars, it was just kind of neat to see that kind of circle back around, to this movie. So I thought it was fun. I really enjoyed it. The ending is kind of cheesy and dumb, but in the same way that like the ending of The Fifth Element is kind of cheesy and dumb, like almost exactly the same way. But it's Luc Besson. He's got his ideas about,
right,
human nature and what a science fiction action adventure movie, should be about. And I don't know. I really liked it. Like, it's not a perfect movie by any stretch of the imagination, but I just came out feeling like, oh, this was a really fun movie. And it just got me thinking a lot about kind of Star Wars a little more, not just as an influence on Valerian, but Valerian is an influence on Star Wars, but the other way around. And like I said, this is kind of the kind of movie that George Lucas was hoping that people would make after making after he made the prequels, and so that was kind of interesting to see that, oh yeah, this people are kind of following up on that and keeping that alive, and this kind of action adventure, comic booky, spaceships and aliens, and the movie too, and maybe this was one of the knocks it got, and then I'll stop talking in a second. But in that the plot was not super important. The movie definitely, there's an overarching plot, but at the same time it feels kind of episodic within the movie, and that I think is you can trace that to the lineage of its role as a comic book. But in George Lucas loving those, Flash Gordon and all of those kinds of serials, like if that interests you, if that is also something that you like and appreciate, then Valerian is kind of the next iteration of that, I think.
Okay, well, I mean, it's interesting because it's like, again, I haven't seen this Valerian, and I probably should, because the way you describe it sounds interesting. But it's like that, the thing with Star Wars is kind of weird relationship with its influences has created this. It's the best example you can ever see of how many films have been made, post Star Wars that influence Star Wars, and it becomes right. This weird situation. And I don't know if Valerian is. I haven't seen it, but I haven't seen anybody saying like, it was so heavily influenced Star Wars that when you made the movie, people just thought it was a ripoff of Star Wars. Whereas that happened, in some ways, that was one of the criticisms of, believe it or not, it was even David Lynch's Dune got a little bit of that kind of like, George had taken so much from Dune with, references to spice and desert planet and young heroes. Right. And because even then it's like, in the 70s, the idea of having, like a 19-year-old kind of callow youth and, and a young, headstrong teenage princess kind of being the stars of a movie in an era of, Gene Hackman and Marlon Brando and, guys like Lee Marvin doing action movies. There wasn't a lot of even like something like, Planet of the Apes, where Charlton Heston's already probably in his 50s when he made that movie. It's like not a thing. So it's kind of that, it dips into this idea of kind of youth, which now it's even more so, where it's like, wouldn't, with these kind of Maze Runner, Hunger Games, where it's basically very, teenagers for sure, like even younger than Luke and Leia would be. It's that kind of thing where people go, oh, I'm kind of going off in the weeds already. My point is that look at John Carter of Mars, the the major Disney flop, which is a great movie, and it's a shame.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, it's a fun movie that is pretty religious to the original text. It does get Disneyfied, and it should be Disneyfied because it's like one of the protagonists is topless the entire movie, the entire book. And it's like, but they were able to kind of, they put in a framing device that was a little ridiculous. I mean, that's definitely one of those movies that was completely goofed up by its marketing. It's a fun kind of movie with a kind of, a simple plot, good versus evil, and it's like that kind of these kind of movies, because apparently there's a whole sequence in the movie that's so much like the gladiator scene in Geonosis, it would make you think, oh, geez, they just stole this from Attack of the Clones, when it's, totally from a book written in the 20s. And I guess my point is, it's just like that kind of thing where it's like, it kind of bums me out, because with, Valerian kind of tanking and John Carter tanking, it gets to be like, it almost reinforces this idea that when it comes to genre movies, the companies really only want to back proven properties, and if something's, it's like, oh, we're going to do, and I would say a French comic book from 1967 would not constitute a solid property. So it's not like a comic book, like you're grabbing a Marvel and making a Marvel movie. So it's that situation where it's
and I think, I mean, and this movie was made relatively independently of like a major studio, right? Like Disney is not backing this, or Fox or Paramount is not backing this movie. So I mean, I think that speaks to your point that, Luc Besson wanted to get this made and kind of had to do it himself.
Well, and I think that's what is happening, because you look at something like, John Carter, which I think was a $200 million movie that they spent $10 on the marketing of, and subsequently there was a kind of a trickle down thing, which caused the Disney as far as what the rumors are, the third Tron movie, which I was excited about, and maybe I was the only person, and then you take another movie like the Wachowskis did that terrible Jupiter Ascending film, kind of on the back of a not terrible but confusing adaptation of the book Cloud Atlas. And those are, as much as I didn't like Jupiter Ascending, it's like, I'm glad that it exists. Of course, every time I try to watch it, I turn it off because I'm like, it takes too long to get the story going. But I guess my point is, it's sad to think that, like, when these things come out and people don't really care about them, or they don't do well, it kind of makes people to be less apt probably to greenlight larger things. Because it's like, when you see movies now, and I'm definitely not the first one to point out how many retreads and reboots and there are. But again, it's who's going to go see in something new when people, maybe they don't want something new. Because I mean, I'm thinking back, because this came up on another podcast that I really like, about they did a kind of a tribute to the year 1982, which seems odd, but just go through and look at the movies released in 1982. It was a cavalcade of everything, and there was definitely not a Star Wars movie released in 82. So I think it was probably like the last the last run of these kind of, it's like everything got greenlit because, hey, we want the next Star Wars, but everybody made the great effort to not copy Star Wars, and you ended up with all these singular movies like, well, Wrath of Khan, which was the second Star Trek movie, but Tron and E.T. and I don't want to list them all because it would take forever. But I guess my point is that it kind of makes you realize, it's like when we look back at film, and it's like 1982 was such a great year, and I think a lot of that had to do with not of something like what Luc Besson is taking a chance on. I mean, I remember that The Fifth Element, I think, was quite a successful film when it came out, and I think that's partly because the visuals, it kind of seemed to built on Blade Runner, that kind of idea, and it kind of turned it on its head a little bit, and added a lot more, took a little bit of the humor from Star Wars, and kind of built that, and I think it's like that perfect storm. Now, again, this Valerian coming so quickly after the Jupiter Ascending, I wonder if that, a lot of the like trailers and whatnot, it felt very similar to it. And I wonder if that was a mistake, or maybe I'm just overthinking it and people are like, I don't even remember Jupiter Ascending. It's like, it wasn't a factor in why
Jupiter Ascending was like, that was when I talk about going into Valerian expecting kind of a crazy mess, like Jupiter Ascending was kind of a mess. From what I remember reading of the reviews, I didn't see it myself, but just like weird over the top acting and plot holes all over the place. That
inappropriate casting, which was a big problem with that.
And the CGI that was kind of looked good in some scenes, but then not in others. So that's kind of what I expected out of Valerian. But it was actually, it was kind of like if the prequels, or if one of those kinds of movies, but it was made competently, right? Like it was competently made, and that's kind of maybe why right, on the one hand, you're like, oh, I kind of wanted to see this crazy, all over the place thing. But on the other hand, it's like, oh, I'm glad someone knows how to make one of these kinds of movies competently. And I will say too, I don't know, maybe I'm spoiling a cameo, because I certainly didn't know he was in this movie. But if you do see Valerian, get ready for Ethan Hawke having maybe the most fun on screen that he has ever had. Like, he's clearly, like, it's not a character. Like, both my wife and I, he came on screen, and then after a while we're like, is that Ethan Hawke? Like, you're not totally sure that's him at first, and not because he's wearing a ton of makeup, he's not, but just like, he looks, right, he's gotten older, he's a little bigger in his role than you're used to seeing him, but then also he's just having so much fun playing this kind of over the top character that you're just like, is that? No, that's not Ethan Hawke, right? Oh, this was, and then to circle back to the beginning, and then in the car on the way home, we were talking about it, and my wife, like, at least among, famously does not know the names of any actors and actresses or like what they've been in. But she was like, when she said, "Oh, I can't believe that was Ethan Hawke," and she was like, you see, I knew who that is because he's in my other favorite movie, Gattaca," and I was like, geez. "What? You like?"
This is almost like she almost like misrepresented herself at this point. She might be
right, exactly.
She might be a nerd, and she didn't even know it.
But she doesn't like science fiction, but she loves Futurama and Fifth Element and Gattaca.
That's funny. I mean, Ethan Hawke is listed on the he's listed in the thing, but that's funny because that's like the second time that he's shown up in a movie. Well, this time he's well, I don't think he actually showed up in the theatrical version, but the really crappy remake or reboot or whatever you call it of Total Recall, he has a cameo in that, which is really strange because it's only in a certain version of the movie, which I ended up with because I was like, I need to see this, and I bought like the Blu-ray, but I got rid of it, and it's like this. But then later on,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I'll watch the extended version, and there's like that reveal,
Mm-hmm.
like in Total Recall, when Schwarzenegger finds out, like he watches a video of himself explaining what happened. Well, it's the same thing, but instead of it being, oh gosh, who's the Irish actor was the star of that movie? Oh, Farrell, Colin Farrell.
Carl
So
Urban?
instead of it being Colin Farrell, it's actually Ethan Hawke, and he explains like, you had your face changed and all this stuff, and it was very like, huh? But I think I understand why they
Right.
took it out, but yeah, Ethan Hawke's kind of having an interesting career. The way that he's like showing
Right.
up and stuff, it's like, I think he's got some kind of contract where he does those low budget like horror movies, and then he can, make a Linklater film every couple years. But
Right.
yeah, it's kind of like,
But him being in this movie is gets back to what you talked about. With things could have been wild miscasting, like with Jupiter Ascending. It's like, yeah, it would have been very easy for them to just find a character actor, someone who plays these kinds of parts all the time, and like, oh, he would have been fine. But Ethan Hawke, you see, and you're like, why is Ethan Hawke in like this character? But it totally works because he's just having so much fun. You're like, oh, he's having a lot of fun. So again, just to, I guess, put
should have been Callum
bow
Keith
on it,
Rennie.
right? Like it's competently, it's like a competently made, sci-fi action adventure B movie kind of thing, and so I liked it a lot. While recognizing that it's not a perfect movie and that there are, there are parts in it where it kind of drags or whatever, but I don't know. I just had a lot of fun. So
Well, and it's a good thing. And again, I probably should have went and saw it, but I hate sitting in the movie theater these days. But it's kind of, again, to what I was talking about, the idea that so much has been cherry picked from
Right.
the source material, that we've almost become, we've become the idea that the reboots become like this safe space of ideas, and like, oh, let's push it a little bit forward, but let's keep it so familiar that people won't walk in with a blank slate, which I think is a little bit of what we hadn't got a chance to talk to, is this second trailer for Denis Villeneuve or whatever. I don't know how to pronounce the man's name. Villeneuve. Blade Runner 2049, which, I mean, apart from the horrible title, it should have just been something like, Edge of Human, Dangerous Days, any of that stuff would have been better than just the idea. Right. But I've already hammered that. And again, the movie's not out. I don't think it comes out till October or November.
Right.
I've only seen these trailers, and that's all I have to go from. But I mean, I'm kind of reticent in the idea that it's gonna suck. You know what I mean? It's gonna suck in a really bad way. Although the one thing that I have to keep grappling with, and it's like just a blind spot in my own brain about this. Maybe it because how intensely I love that film, is that I totally forget that there's a whole segment of people that just think it's a boring turd, and I'm like, and I can respect that, because it's like the stuff that they're talking about, like, okay, they don't like that, and I do, and so I can respect that they didn't like that. So it's maybe I'm overthinking it, maybe I'm not, maybe people aren't as reverent to that source material as I am, but it's just, having seen this trailer, and now the story's a little expanded, as we're getting a sense of what story is going to be told, and it's, and I think we referred to this in emails off the show, that it looks like they're also pilfering ideas from the original script, the Hampton Fancher thing, which, for people that have seen the trailer, and it's not really going to be a spoiler, but I guess when Ridley and Hampton Fancher were kind of working or something, Hampton Fancher's idea started with a very elaborate opening for his idea for the original Blade Runner, had to do with being kind of in a wasteland at the end of a train track, and this idea of a kind of a hard-boiled detective with a hat and a duster going into this town and sitting there in a chair and kind of like watching a soup pot boil for hours and hours and hours. And then finally somebody comes home and you realize that this Deckard has been waiting for him, and it turns out like he shoots the guy and then takes his jaw out and actually says made by the Tyrell Corporation. And that's like this big opening, like lost idea. Well, I mean, as far as the second trailer goes, I think they've reused that. It's going to involve Dave Bautista and because I mean the soup pots. I mean I haven't seen a camera zoom in on a clue or a thing that they want since Christmas when the blue milk gets the zoom in Rogue One. It's kind of like, yeah, hey nerds, we're doing that scene, and it's part of me is like, oh, okay, well I kind of already know how that goes, so I'm already kind of bored, and I'm only watching the trailer. I don't know. I think that everything is telling me that this Blade Runner 2049 is just going to be the also ran sequel that nobody asked for a movie that was of its time. And it's like, even the visuals, I don't know how, 35 years later, there's with CGI being so prevalent and, Blade Runner being probably the largest scale model kind of, the last big one they ever did on that level, where then it started, computer animation started creeping in. I just, I would say Blade Runner is like 60, maybe even 70% visuals and music, because it's like, at that time, except for maybe Clockwork Orange, there hadn't really been a heavily synthesized score that kind of like, in that time, synthesizers were still kind of viewed as a futuristic thing. Now it's those sounds, that kind of raw Jupiter, whatever, open oscillator sound actually is a very evocative of 35 years previous. Whereas when we were 35 years ago, we thought that's what our future was going to be like. And it just the kind of things that you could see is that I feel like there's no sense of wonder. And maybe that's going to be the point of the movie. And, maybe, the LA or whatever of 2049 is it's society in complete decay, and they're kind of needlessly retro, but I don't know if that's going to be, I think that's good. I get the feeling that this is just going to be a real bummer of a story. It's kind of like, it's not going to be uplifting or intellectually interesting. And, just a lot of this idea, like, they keep playing in the, quick things of what's his face. Oh God, I'm blanking on his name. Well, even, geez, I should really keep these names up. Robin Wright is in it, and she's kind of referring to like, oh, if they find out there's going to be a war and all this stuff. And it's like, we know this. It's like, there's nothing about this. Like, there's not going to be a war in this movie. It's this kind of like, they're trying to get people excited that there's going to be some kind of big battle at the end, and everything I've seen so far makes me think that this is kind of just like, oh, we've came up with this story that's kind of a sequel to Blade Runner, but we're not really going to push we're not going to push the visuals. We're going to keep it within the realm. Everybody's going to kind of look like like it maybe took place a year after the original Blade Runner instead of the 35 years. It's that kind of, I don't know. It just, to me, and of course, coming off of, Ridley Scott's, kind of misstep, in my opinion, of Alien. Gosh, I can't even remember the name of it. The last Alien movie, and also some people, I've seen some interviews where people have posted some interviews about, what intellectually Ridley Scott, because he's the executive producer of this, and so he's kind of the puppet master. And then it comes to be like, he's still kind of talking about, whether Deckard was a replicant. And I know that that's a contention. Like, people can debate that all day. And I, at the end of the day, it's like, I have my opinion, but it's like, if you can make a good salient point to prove whether he is or isn't, do it. But I don't think it's the most interesting question in the movie, but
Right.
he's been like really,
And it's even like an accidental question in some
yeah.
ways.
And that's the thing. It's like, and he's doubling
yeah.
down on his kind of assessment of that, and his like reasoning is almost comical in the sense that he's like, I made the movie, I can make it whatever I want, kind of George Lucas-y kind of attitude. So to me, it realizes that the intellectual questions that Ridley Scott's productions are asking aren't particularly interesting. So I don't have a lot of hope for this one. Whereas I'm kind of feeling bad now that I didn't go out and see Valerian. Maybe I should rectify that this weekend.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right that it is going to end up being kind of a bummer of a movie. And I mean, it seems like it's going to be more conventional in a lot of ways than the original Blade Runner was, which, because in many ways Blade Runner influenced a lot of people since, and so it became part of the convention. All of those reasons. But I mean, I see that trailer and I'm mostly like, oh, Jared Leto.
Yeah, that's the name. Sorry, yeah.
Like, oh yeah, just he needs to dial it back a lot. Like, there wasn't. I mean, Rutger Hauer gave this like amazing performance that. He was kind of over the top in some ways and in some scenes, but never in like a showy way. Whereas at least in this trailer, and it's hard to judge a trailer, but I feel like Jared Leto, his last several, the current day Jared Leto is all about like, watch this, and like, hey, I'm gonna show you something, and I'm gonna take a look at this performance, and in this case, it's like, I'm going to bring that, I'm consciously like, I'm going to bring some of that Rutger Hauer performance into mine, even though he's a different kind of character. And it's just like, tone it down.
Yeah, I mean, he's the kind of
like,
actor.
we get it. We don't, and some of it maybe is the dialogue he's delivering too, but it's just like, yeah, we get it. You don't have to hit us over the head with, you get the dialogue, and then we get his, weird contacts in his eyes, and it's just too much. And so that's why I'm kind of like, yeah, they're gonna emphasize all of the stuff that they don't need to emphasize, and de-emphasize all the stuff that was actually interesting about the original.
Yeah, and if you ever really need like any more reason to, I don't want to use the word hate, but to kind of roll your eyes at Jared Leto, you got to watch that documentary called Artifact, which is like about his band, which was his attempt. So like, the one thing I will say that it's a good and a bad thing about Jared Leto is that he will play characters that have already been established. Like, he's not afraid to take that on, which I would think that most actors...
He's not intimidated by...
Well, most actors would probably say, like, I'm not going to screw up my career by taking on, Heath Ledger's Joker is second. I would say it exceeded Jack Nicholson's Joker, but, that's an iconic role. It's been played anywhere from Mark Hamill to Cesar Romero, and it's like, yeah, do you really want to be... It's kind of like playing, well, no, I won't even, no, I'm not going to say that, but it's like the idea when people, back in the day, it's like when an actor would finally like play Jesus in a movie, then they would start going, yeah, this actor's lost the plot. Now he thinks he's Jesus or something like that.
Right.
And it's kind of like, well, and that did happen for some actors played that, and it would, people would all of a sudden attach this like air that the person was being kind of pretentious, like, oh, he played Jesus, he must think he's pretty great. And that's kind of a little bit with Jared Leto. It's like, oh, he plays the Joker. Now, I honestly don't think his Joker was bad. I'm trying to think of movies that I really, really enjoyed him in. I do remember enjoying Dallas Buyers Club, but I think, again, that was kind of, he played it kind of probably a little over the top, but I only saw that movie once, but yeah, his Joker I thought was good, especially him kind of going off of that. And I don't know what he's taking on in Blade Runner. In some ways, is he taking on the Tyrell? Is he, in some ways, if he's spouting philosophy, in some ways he's Roy Batty, it's like maybe he's not a replicant, but he's the sage, the sage wisdom of the movie, you know, spouting this kind of philosophical idea about the nature of humanity or whatever. I mean, Eldon Terrell, or I forget the guy's name that played him, he was more of a almost kind of a used car salesman character, which I think you know, is good because in Blade Runner it shows you like Roy Batty's utter contempt for, you know, it's like meeting God and finding out that, oh, he's like, oh yeah, you're just something I threw together with parts, you know, and like, you need to respect me though. And that kind of Roy Batty's, you know, dull horror that he meets his maker and realizes that he's just as more fragile than he is, even more so. And so if I think that that's what he's trying to maybe tie into, but who knows? I don't know what the story is. Again, I'm reading an awful lot into a trailer, so I can totally, if people are rolling their eyes, I understand, but it's like, I can see that they're trying to do something. It's just everything that I've seen in the last couple years about filmmaking and our obsession with reboots makes me think this won't end well. But that being said, let's talk about our favorite.
Speaking of, I was going to say, what were you going to say?
Sorry, Star Wars.
I was going to say, speaking of which, let's talk about the young Han Solo movie.
Exactly. Well, that's kind of, it is technically still a Star Wars movie, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. They're still attaching
some breaking news today.
Yes, we got some such hot news that we didn't talk about it until almost an hour into the show. But whatever.
Yeah. We have a composer.
We have a composer. We don't have a title for the Han Solo movie, but we have a composer. Yeah. And that man's name is John Powell.
Powell.
He's an English dude.
He is a London native.
And according to Wikipedia, he has been an atheist since age 6. So, okay,
that is not in the StarWars.com press release.
Oh, see, I didn't go to the press release. I went right to the horse's mouth because I was like, I need to know this guy's religious background. But anyway, no, I mean I don't know. He sounds like he looks like he's worked a lot with. He's done a lot of animated films. He's worked with Paul Greengrass.
So he has an interesting, and by interesting I mean all over the place, filmography as a composer. His very first feature film on which he was a composer was Face Off, 1997's Face Off, which was then followed up by 1998's Ants with a Z. And there's some romantic comedies in there. Forces of Nature, the Sandra Bullock vehicle. He did Chicken Run. He did Shrek. The movie Evolution, if you recall, which I believe was the David Duchovny, the Ivan Reitman picture. He did I Am Sam, and then he's done the Bourne movies. I feel like I need to be reading these out in like a Don Pardo voice, kind of. The Adventures of Pluto Nash.
Have you ever seen that movie?
Agent Cody Banks. What's that?
Have you ever seen Pluto Nash?
No, I have not.
I bought it on a $2 table at Half Price Books, and it's like, and again, I've said it many times before. I'll watch a great movie once and a bad movie 5 times. I never made it through this thing. I don't know if that means it's really good, but I think it means it's actually so ridiculous as it actually kind of gives you a headache to watch. But that's no reflection on the music. That was a troubled production from top to bottom. Right. Sorry.
So he's also done Mr. and Mrs. Smith, X-Men: The Last Stand, Jumper, but then Kung Fu Panda, and various, spin it. Kung Fu Panda 2 also. He did How to Train Your Dragon 1 and 2. He did one of the Ice Age movies. He did Mars Needs Moms. And then also the Jason Bourne movies. So, yeah, kind of all over the place. in these situations, I go to one of my go-to sources. I go to a go-to source. You can tell I'm ready to talk about this. The Score, which I've talked about several times on the show, which is a radio show / podcast about film music. And I was like, oh, I want, that show is devoted an episode once to the music of Michael Giacchino, and sometimes they do episodes specifically about different, contemporary or recently passed film composers or music editors or music conductors for these things. So I was like, oh, maybe they did an episode about this guy. He's done enough. They didn't do an episode about him, but they did an interview with a guy whose name I don't remember, even though I just listened to it like 2 hours ago. A guy who is a music producer. Excuse me. He's a music producer for record label, putting out a lot of these movie soundtracks, including How to Train Your Dragon. And so they asked him, you've worked with this guy, and this nameless person whose name I can't remember said of John Powell that he is basically one of the best, modern / contemporary film music composers around, and that How to Train Your Dragon specifically is the very best of what film music can be today.
Wow.
So obviously this guy is like a colleague, a friend, probably.
Well, he was also nominated for an Oscar for that score.
Yeah. So, right. So obviously he doesn't have any incentive to like badmouth this guy, but very, very high praise for John Powell. So that I thought was interesting. That I certainly expected him to be somewhat complimentary, but just as I didn't expect it to be that complimentary and that sort of high praise. So, and I of his movies, I think I've probably only seen the 2 How to Train Your Dragon movies, and I liked them fine. I didn't notice the music so much, except for the fact that these movies take place in Scotland or a Scotland-like country, and so they involve the music. The score at certain points has like bagpipes or snare drum, the way a Highland piper band might. That's did I see X-Men: The Last Stand? I might have seen X-Men: The Last Stand.
That's the one, the movie that's so bad that they actually have made 8 movies trying to knock it out of the timeline.
Yeah. So, but I was not paying any attention to the music. I was just paying attention to how awful that movie was. So yeah. So so this music producer had very high praise for him. He seems to do good work. But all over the place. So it's kind of hard to get a read on what his style is, I would say, because he's doing these Bourne movies, but then also Happy Feet 2 and Kung Fu Panda at the same time. So who knows what will be in store for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is. I'm not going to say this was a bad anything, because I mean the man's got a CV as long as my arm. I think it's just it's a sign of that they are going to probably going forward. They're probably going to start to try to find very good composers, but they're probably going to de-emphasize their position. It was kind of like a thing where they had. They announced it on the Star Wars show, and it was kind of almost like an aside. They didn't really have a lot to say about it. Of course, again, you're dealing with the fact that we don't even have a movie, and Ron Howard is in there, jumping in the quote, save the film. But that isn't what, actually, that's one thing I will note, that if I'm looking at his other films, I don't think he's ever worked with Ron Howard. So that's interesting. I don't really know if, I know that Ron Howard, at least he worked with Brian Grazer. I don't know if their partnership is still a going concern. But I don't know of him having like a certain crew that he works with or he's more kind of like, some guys. I can see that this John Powell might be has worked a lot with Hans Zimmer, and he might be kind of maybe not a student of Zimmer, but maybe a contemporary Hans Zimmer. And Hans Zimmer, he can be I think he can be a controversial composer in the film music, where a lot of people find his scores to be lacking in emotion or whatever. He kind of uses a lot of synthesis and, you know, music editing and found sounds and whatever. Right. I assume the score we're going to get is going to be very Star Wars, probably much in the manner of a Rogue One. Maybe not in that kind of music. Maybe the more of the whimsical kind of stuff. I don't think they're going to let this guy kind of have a free range. After all the problems I've had in production, I think they'll probably go for a very conservative, tasteful, Star Wars-esque score, you know? I don't think that this guy coming on to this is like a sign of like, oh, we're gonna mix it up. We're gonna do something different. Now, I could be wrong, and in the first 5 minutes, you know, there'll be a harmonica and a dobro going off or something when, you know, and then I'll just be like, damn it, they should have gotten W. Snuffy Walden or something. You know, I don't know. Yeah. But it's like, that's the one thing I'm hoping that they're going to do. You know, they're not going to, I think I think Kathy Kennedy's opinion of thing is like, let's not mess with the formula too much. And I can't imagine that they're going to go, hey, John Powell, you know, we love your work. Now we really want to give you carte blanche to write whatever you want. Because, I mean, that's the whole kind of seed of the problem. And a quick aside, about that. You know, that was the big thing that they took Lord and Miller to task in the press, that they were upset that they were doing a lot of improvisation and going off script. Mm-hmm. And that was, did you see any of the thing about the new Thor movie, that they're pushing this thing like 80% of the script was improvised? It was kind of a weird, you know, even since they're all under that Disney banner, it kind of goes to show you that that Kathy Kennedy does kind of have a free range to kind of run Lucasfilm as such, you know. Like, of course, the guy they hired, Taika Waititi, I think his name is. He's a New Zealand director actor, and he did What We Do in the Shadows, which is a great comedy. But it's like, I guess maybe, but he was kind of like that, like the Lord and Miller guys, in the fact that they had, you know, well, I wouldn't call Lego Movie and the Jump Street movies cult movies, but they were kind of known for their comedy. So it's kind of interesting. That's it's an example of, hey, let's get a guy who's known for comedy and add some comedy to our thing. And then like, okay, we're really happy, instead of saying, let's get these guys who are known for being funny and then let's get them do an origin story for one of the most beloved characters in movie history. You know, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just quickly looking through Ron Howard movies to see if he works with anyone in particular to do the music, and I'm not really seeing.
Well, how was the music in Valerian? Because Alexander Desplat left Rogue One to score this. So I'm kind of curious.
It was pretty good. Yeah, I liked it.
Was it kind of just a traditional?
I did when I saw his name, because I had forgotten that he worked on it. And so when I saw his name at the end, I was like, oh, I wonder if there was anything in here that he originally wrote for Rogue One. But Rogue One's a much darker movie, so maybe not. But yeah, no, I like the movie. I like the music in Valerian.
Was it a traditional score? Was it just an orchestral score?
Yeah. Yep, it was. There might have been, there were one or two points where they put a pop song in it, but it was not nearly to the extent. It wasn't like Guardians of the Galaxy.
Okay.
You know, like the soundtrack is James Gunn's iPod, basically. You know, it's it was a predominantly orchestral score. I'm not really seeing anyone listed as composer on any of these Ron Howard movies. The closest I'm seeing is either music supervisor or then orchestrator. Because even What's that?
I'm sorry, I'm looking at
Sorry,
this.
go ahead.
I did like a cross reference. I think if we're talking about composers he's worked with, the closest would probably have been he worked like at least 3 times, 4 times with the late James Horner.
Ah, right. Yeah,
Ransom, Apollo 13.
In A Beautiful Mind, at least.
And A Beautiful Mind.
A Beautiful Mind, James Horner is listed as an orchestrator, so I don't know if that's just like
oh yeah, there was
a way
I think
of
there might have been some
paying him
controversy
more or
with
less
that
money.
score.
Yeah.
I think there might have been something about credit on that. Because
and some of Ron Howard's more recent movies, they don't have one composer, but they'll have like 3 or 4 different people listed as composer : additional music. So I don't know if that means he doesn't really right. So the question with John Powell is, how involved was Ron Howard in this decision? Was this his call? Was this Kathleen Kennedy's call, or one of the other producers? And I'm sure Ron Howard, gave the okay, but I guess the question is, how much does he really care about the music? Whereas, George Lucas was intimately involved, and like that was a huge part of how he put these movies together. Not every director is like that.
Right.
And so Ron Howard may be one of those directors who's just like, yeah, well, as long as you get someone with a good reputation, I don't really care who it is. Like, I don't have anything particular I'm looking for. Just get someone who other people who has good references, right? And that so certainly John Powell would have good references, because in a lot of these other Ron Howard movies, you just have 3 or 4 different people listed as composer : additional music. So I don't know if he just, whoever's available at the time, they just like find 3 or 4 people to work in parallel on different scenes, and then they kind of compile it together, and that's what the music supervisor. I don't know. There's one name who shows up consistently as being a composer of additional music on his movies, and that's this guy named Lorne Balfe, who's a Scottish composer. He has worked on Inception and Iron Man and The Dark Knight. He also did the music for the Marcella sitcom, apparently. The Ghost in the Shell movie that came out recently. But then he's credited with, additional music on several of, like 2000s era Ron Howard movies. So he's worked with Ron Howard consistently, but I don't know that, he's someone that Ron Howard says like, oh, he absolutely has to work on this movie. Maybe he will come in later, right? Maybe we've already had one composer leave the film late in the process and have to be replaced with Rogue One. Maybe the process for this movie is going to be that, John Powell writes most of it, and then a couple other people come in to knock out whatever scenes they have to do in the reshoots. I don't know. That doesn't seem like it's been the way that John Powell has worked before, but again, who knows to what extent Ron Howard was involved in this hire, or even has any kind of preference about who he wants to score this movie, especially a movie where he comes in so late in the process, where so many of the other creative decisions have been made. Maybe this is a case where he says, what, this is one thing that I will have control over. I want to make sure that I put my stamp on it, and I want to get this guy who has a really good reputation and who's, stuff I like. Maybe that's how it worked. I don't know.
Yeah, it's kind of, it makes you wonder what, Ron Howard has kind of come from, he's obviously a lifelong Hollywood guy, but he did come from that, or his early directing career was that, working with Roger Corman and doing things like that. And I think it's like that kind of, well, you talk a lot about, what is the auteur theory of film. And I think maybe he's one of these guys who definitely does not subscribe to that idea. And I think he's probably Ron Howard, I know you're not a fan, and if pressed, I'm probably not a huge fan. I don't dislike him, but I'm not like, oh my God, the new Ron Howard film's coming out. I got to go see it. But he's a workman-like guy, and I think that this composer is a workman-like composer, and I know that can be a loaded term. It's kind of that thing where you're just like, oh, that's just a nice way of saying kind of boring. But no, it's not. It's mediocre. It's kind of like showing up and doing the work kind of situation. And when that works, and I feel like Michael Giacchino really, to me, it's like I still stand by this, is I enjoy the Rogue One score overall more than the Force Awakens score. Except for like maybe Rey's theme, which I think is, was a great, it's a great piece mixed with a lot of themes that I wasn't as into. So, I mean, just because he's coming in and he's like known for like being like, hey, we need X, give us X. That doesn't mean he can't do something fantastic, and evocative of and we do want, at least I do. I want things evocative of John Williams, or at least the people that influenced John Williams' composition for Star Wars. If somebody's like, well, I can't just do a John Williams impersonation, so I'm going to go back to Aaron Copland and Korngold and Wagner and all these Holst, and I'm going to go back to the source. Although, I don't know what kind of story they're telling. Maybe those are too big of themes for what essentially might be a kind of a much smaller scoped movie than we really think. But who knows? I'd like to see some footage. I mean, apparently I'm sure they're keeping it all under wraps, and I'm sure you've seen like Lando's capes and the have you seen the Wookiee, the two Wookiees that Ron Howard has put in?
Yeah. Chewbacca and possibly his wife.
Possibly Mrs. Baca. So, I mean, I would like, again, a lot of people I know have basically written this one off. I don't know if I'm 100% there as far as I'm interested to see what they did, what they're doing, how they're going to fix it. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people are unhappy with the subject, the casting, and in some ways it's like, well, maybe there's some life in the old idea of doing these anthology movies. I mean, a lot of people had a lot of deep reservations to Rogue One, and I think essentially it kind of bested most people's low opinion of the idea of doing a spin-off. I think it worked better than when it didn't work. I'm sorry, I'm very very all over the place today.
No, that's all right. Yeah, I mean, you're right in the sense of kind of what the stakes for this movie. I mean, I feel dumb talking about the stakes for the Star Wars franchise, if this movie succeeds or not. But the music, the history of Star Wars movies has been that the music is kind of integral to people's experiences watching Star Wars movies. And Giacchino less so, but I think that was in part because everyone recognized, like, all right, he had like 2 weeks to write the score for this movie. Like the expectations were not the same as they were even for Alexander Desplat when he was still working on the Star Wars movie, right? The expectation was going to be like, well, what is, how is he going to match the work that John Williams does? How is he going to follow the work of John Williams? And now I feel like, and maybe it's because of the either some combination of the experience of Rogue One or just the expectations of this Han Solo movie now, that I feel like we're going to see less of that for John Powell, which is not, and I don't think that's a reflection on Powell. I think that's, as you say, a reflection of the fact that, this movie is in such a weird place. The Han Solo movie is in such a weird place that no one really knows what to expect. And so we're not thinking of, the integration of the costumes and the sets and the story and the music. We're not thinking of that in the same way now. Like everything is just kind of up in the air as a jumble, and it's sort of like, well, we'll see what we get. And I kind of like, in some ways, I still want to have that anticipation. I mean, I am nervous for what it will sound like. I don't want it to sound generic. All of those same issues, fears I had leading up to Rogue One. But at the same time, like, well, it's a movie, it's an industry. These things happen with movies. If they're going to make Star Wars movies this way, this kind of stuff is going to start happening to Star Wars movies. It's nothing really to be all that concerned about. And so, you're already kind of like, well, okay, I personally don't get that excited about film scores in other contexts. So, this is just kind of like that, which, is sort of a bummer because, like, no, this is Star Wars. I still want it to feel like special, and I want to have that nervous energy. But with this movie now, it's kind of like, well, it's whatever happens, it's fine. Either it'll be good or it won't, and then we won't really have learned anything because this is such an aberration, hopefully, and then we'll just go on from there. So.
Well, you were talking about Rogue One, and one of the things about that we're finding out is there's another announcement, or I don't even think it was an announcement, that a Rogue One cast member is actually going to be reappearing in a Star Wars film, and that Star Wars film is the Han Solo movie, and that actor is Spencer Wilding.
I kind of wanted it to be Donnie Yen. I wanted Donnie Yen to be in
like a Jedi
movie.
thing. That would have been kind of.
I didn't even think of that. I was just like, I like Donnie Yen and Rogue One so much. They should just put him in all the Star Wars movies now.
Put Baze's wig on him, and all of a sudden it's just like, we did it cheap. We put a wig on him, and he's like wearing like some baggy. He becomes pants.
This. Yeah, he's the Star Wars version of Stan Lee now, where he just like shows up in like an oddly out of place situation that doesn't have any bearing on the rest of the movie, and then you're just like, hi everyone, well, see you later.
Exactly.
Like, who is that?
Oh boy, he seemed a lot taller on the page or whatever. But Spencer Wilding, what people will know is he played Vader, but I'll be honest, I don't know where he played Vader, because did he play Vader on Mustafar? Did he play Vader in the hallway? Because, I mean, there was some talk that they had actually recast that Vader thing, because they filmed the hallway lightsaber battle so late in production that I don't think Spencer Wilding played Vader in that. He was the one in the scenes on the Death Star that got cut. He was the one on Mustafar, which... Yeah.
Maybe this is their way of making that up to him then.
Yeah.
It's like, well, we cut you out of all these scenes. How'd you like to come be in Han Solo?
Well, then there was they had an actor, oh God, what was his name? Seamus. I think it just goes by Seamus. He's like a Scottish MMA guy. And I think he played Vader in this deleted concept of having Luke and Vader on Bespin superimposed into Rey's dream sequence, but I think they opted not to use it. That's why there were Force Awakens Luke and Vader figures. But I mean, whatever. It's kind of like you get a big guy, and it's like he was probably gonna be a big alien or something, or just a big guy.
Right.
It's kind of like with Game of Thrones, which I know you don't watch. There's a character called the Mountain, and really all you know about, he's really big and he's really cruel, and he's been played by like 3 or 4 different people. It's like, and now he's not, you don't see his face now. It's because he was, something happened to him, which I won't spoil for people, but like, so now it's like that kind of thing where it's just like, oh, well, these genre pictures, you're going to have aliens or, big warriors. It's like, they need to hire big guys. It's kind of like, they want to have for lack of a better word, they want to have a stable of, actors. It's kind of like the idea that you want to have somebody like that. It's like the way that Warwick Davis has kind of become like the good luck charm for Star Wars films. It's that idea, and he also has a lot of experience, and so I don't know, I bet you anything he has a lot to do with kind of other cast members when they come in, like, I've done like 7 of these ones, I'll tell you how to do it kind of situation, where it's like, where like they're apparently reusing these actors. My point is reusing these actors, especially when they're in costumes. I just think it's smart. You want to work with you work with people that can do the work. You want to work with people who aren't going to get on a podcast and tell everybody, "Oh, you're going to love the movie because it's got this in it and that in it," and So I don't really think this is a big deal, though. So, but I do not think he'll be playing Vader. And in the notes here, you asked, "Do you think would I want to see that?" And I'm like, no, I don't need to. I hate to say it, as much as I enjoy the doff of the cap to the fans, having Mustafar and seeing him in his little tank and then seeing him. It's like, if I'm being honest about the movie, it's like Darth Vader didn't need to be in it. So it's kind of,
no.
I don't think he definitely doesn't need to be in this one.
Yeah, no. I mean, I seriously doubt that he's playing Vader. Right. As you said, they got several people to play Vader in Rogue One. It doesn't necessarily have to be him. So if Vader was going to be in it, they could have fired someone else. I do think he's probably going to play some kind of like big henchman or big, because he's 6'6", according to IMDb. He's 1.98 meters, which is 6'6". So he's best known, this is his mini bio on IMDb, he's best known for his interpretation of strong and imposing characters, often using prosthetics and makeup. So he could be, an alien, he could be some kind of henchman, he could be any number of characters from young Han Solo's life. But yeah, I think if they put Vader in Han Solo, that would be kind of squaring the circle too much, right? Like, not everything has to connect, and especially given that Rogue One led directly into A New Hope. I think to have Vader in this movie, it might seem like too much, and I think it opens them up to lots of jokes among people who aren't huge fans. Oh, I guess they're just going to put Vader in every movie now.
Right.
And I don't think they want that. So, yeah, I doubt he'll be in it, but as Vader, I should say, but he will be in the movie. So,
yeah, and he's also been in
whatever character he portrays.
He's also been in Guardians of the Galaxy, which obviously is another Disney thing. So, yeah, he's he's even played a White Walker on Game of Thrones. So he's a known quantity. And if you need a really tall, buff dude, although it's like when they're showing him standing, it's like he's obviously a big guy, but he's not like a bodybuilder like David Prowse. Of course, I'm already looking at him. He's just wearing a jacket, so I don't know. I'm not going to critique his physique. So, but that's the one thing about Vader. It's like sometimes when you see Vader in comics and in the past that they way over buffed him, which is kind of interesting. Just a quick aside, I kind of noticed that they have kind of thinned him out a bit in the new comic. That they're
and in Rogue and in Rebels too. I feel like he's a little slimmer,
right?
In some ways in Rebels.
So what should we cover next? Are we going to talk about this Last Jedi stuff?
Yeah, so let's talk about the journey to the Star Wars: The Last Jedi. So San Diego D23 happened a couple of weeks ago. We talked a little bit about it last week, and then since then there has been San Diego Comic-Con, which Lucasfilm did not have, a big official presence, but they're involved in so much other stuff that you still heard about Star Wars news, including they're going to be publishing books, much like they did with The Force Awakens, leading up to The Last Jedi, although I feel like there are fewer of them. Maybe I'll be wrong though. So to kick us off, talking about these books, because there's going to be a kid's book called Chewie and the Porgs or something like that. A Porg is one of those small bird creature with big eyes that we saw in the sizzle reel, which lives on Ahch-To, or Act 2. It is the Star Wars version of a puffin, apparently. So they have puffins, or their version of a puffin in Star Wars. So that's one book. That's a kid's book. We don't really have to talk about that. Entertainment Weekly has an article It's basically a rewritten press release that talks with a few like quotes from people thrown in that talks a little more about a lot of these books and kind of how they'll tie into the movie. So to quote that piece, it says, there won't be books delving deep into the history or lineage of Rey or Finn. That's still kind of what the movies are there for. But, you know, the books will do things like, what's the motivation of General Leia Organa or Luke, or, you know, kind of what's in their backstory that might come up in the movie, right? Something that happens in the movie that, you know, these books will help flesh out, you know, the past a little more. Right, then you get into questions of like canon and like what I guess we already talked about last week, so I don't want to belabor it, but it's pretty clear that, again, that there is still sort of a hierarchy for these things, and it's not like they're treating all of these different media as equal storytelling partners, right? They're basically saving the movies for whichever directors and writers they get who want to tell this, you know, this era of the story, and then everything else, like, yeah, the books will just take care of some of the rest of that, but the books aren't going to like really tell you who some of these characters are until we find out more about them in the movies. So to that end, Ken Liu is putting out a book of interlocking short stories called The Legends of Luke Skywalker that will, quote, unlock parts of his past we don't know. I call them interlocking short stories. The structure is similar to the Canterbury Tales in that way. And another similarity to the Canterbury Tales, the stories are presented as rumors circulating throughout the galaxy. And I don't know if this is Ken Liu or if this is Bresnikan, who wrote the EW piece, but he says it's a clever way to avoid tangling up canon while still delivering tales about a farm boy turned hero's experiences between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. So that's kind of interesting too, that they're restricting it to that time period, right? We're not going to get a Legend of Luke Skywalker that takes place, you know, like, well, I knew the Skywalkers when I lived on Tatooine, and let me tell you about this kid when he was, you know, 12 or whatever. I guess they're saving that for the comics. So that's one book. We've talked about some of these before. So Claudia Gray is writing a young adult novel about Leia called Leia: Princess of Alderaan. That reveals Leia's rise to power by showing how she first became an agent of the rebellion. So this is one of those books that they say there's going to be a very strong connection to some of the stuff that comes up in The Last Jedi, that, you know, you'll read the book, you know, they're hoping you read the book in October or September, whenever it comes out, and then you see the movie, and then the things in the book make more sense after you see the movie. So that's Leia, Princess of Alderaan. Phasma, we've talked about a little bit, a novel about Captain Phasma. She'll be cruel. You'll see her be cruel. You'll be afraid of her after reading this. You'll basically understand how she rose to become a captain in the First Order, and then, you know, how she became, you know, she is a bad guy. So this story will cut back and forth between the present and the past to show her as a young girl, how she got off her home planet, and how she joined the First Order. So that's a little more information about the Phasma book. And then the last one that I think is kind of the big one, you know, that we got more information about is called Star Wars: Canto Bight. This is a short story collection, only 4 short stories though, by different authors, 3 of whom I don't really recognize. One, and then the 4th is John Jackson Miller, who's written several Star Wars books and short stories at this point. And so Canto Bight, we've talked about, is in The Last Jedi. That's the casino planet, you know, partly inspired by the Hitchcock movie To Catch a Thief. And so this is going to be a focus on creatures from the new casino planet. You'll follow 4 different aliens who lead you through some of the gambling parlors and racetracks. And the EWP's called it Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous for Star Wars. And also said it was Rick's Cafe from Casablanca by way of Monte Carlo. But of course, you know, things are not what they seem, and there are all these undercurrents and all of these different storylines going on, you know, beneath whatever we see in The Last Jedi. I almost said The Last Order, The Last Jedi, which, you know, this is exactly kind of what you and I have been sort of asking for a while. This kind of Tales from Jabba's Palace, Tales from Mos Eisley Cantina type of book. And it's a little disappointing that there were only going to be 4 stories, but I would hope that they're focusing on delivering 4 really good short stories rather than like a dozen short stories, of which 3 or 4 might be worth revisiting. So those are kind of the big ones. Other things of note, I guess, there's a book called Cobalt Squadron that's going to be a middle reader book, and that's going to be about the bomber pilots in techs of Cobalt Squadron, which includes Rose, the Kelly Marie Tron character from The Last Jedi, and her sister. And yeah, so those are kind of the big ones. So are there any of those? Well, I guess we've talked about Leia, Princess of Alderaan, and Phasma before. So what do you think about the Ken Liu Legends of Skywalker and about the Star Wars Canto Bight books? Or do either of those really jump out at you and grab you? Are you enticed, or at this point are you kind of like, yeah, these are not really what I wanted?
Well, I'm going to keep an eye on the Canto Bight one just because I was asking for something like that. And like I said, some of those like novellas that they did, or I don't even know if they're considered a novella, but some of the like the Bazine Natal offshoot, which I enjoyed. I didn't grab that Crimson Corsair thing. But I feel like they probably should have done an anthology with those, because I feel like there were so many little books out there that they got lost in the shuffle. So I'm going to go, kind of go against my first blush response, which would be like, well, hey, how am I supposed to care about these characters that I haven't seen yet? And like, right. I assume it'll be out either around before or after, so it doesn't really matter. But the rest of the stuff, I'm kind of surprised that they're doing this Princess of Alderaan is another young adult kind of thing. And I know it's like, and maybe that's just my own take on stuff. I don't really enjoy the young adult writing style. And some people might be like, what are you talking about? It's just writing. But I don't know. There's something about it. It just, it doesn't have any gravitas to me. So generally I'm kind of disappointed with this, especially like that Legends of Luke Skywalker thing. I just don't. When we spend so much time like going like, oh, this is canon, which again, I'm not a huge. As time goes on, I'm like, I understand we should respect a kind of general overview of storytelling, but maybe a strict adherence to canon isn't always great when it crosses media. I mean, movies to movies, books to books, comics to comics, games to games. To me, it just seems easier that way. But this idea, like, oh, we're just going to muddy up the water with, like, instead of actually telling, like, having, like, we're going to, we're planning on this great, 10-book thing that's going to explain, where things are going. And we're going to, release, maybe we'll release the post Return of the Jedi one around the time, like, for a couple years. And then when the saga movies are over, then they can go, we're going to fill in all the blank spots with a whole kind of a new Jedi Order type, long form. So now we'll know what was going on back then. This kind of is like, it feels like a half step. It's like, oh, we're going to unlock parts of the story we don't know. But then when any time something's contradictory, we're just going to be like, oh, it was just a legend of Luke Skywalker. And you're just like,
yeah. I mean, yeah, I agree. It's kind of like a half measure. It's sort of a Weasley way of doing it. And I wonder if they're doing it that way because we'll get a comic at some point that follows Luke in the years in between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. I mean, it doesn't have to be a comic. It could be something else. But I do wonder if, they're clearly like, yeah, we want to tell these stories, but we don't want to tie our hands in the future. Like, that's what the story is.
Right.
And I'm like you in that, when we first started doing the show, we had a lot of like long, serious conversations about canon, what does canon even mean, and like all that kind of stuff. And as time has gone on, I've kind of cared less and less about that. And I've taken more of what is probably like the official Lucasfilm view, which is like, hey, these are all stories. Just enjoy these stories. None of this is really real anyway. So like, just, did you read a fun story? Yeah, great. Like that's kind of, it seems like their approach, which, and I've gotten to that point too, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, if you're going to if you're going to put a thing out calling this The Legends of Luke Skywalker, and this is, about stories of him from his past, don't then say like, well, we're going to reserve the right to contradict these if we want. It's like, well, either write about what he did during that period of his life, or don't. They're trying to have it both ways. So yeah, I mean, the Canto Bight, I'm sort of excited about, just because I like those kinds of Star Wars books. But yeah, this Legends of Luke Skywalker, I mean, it also just makes me think of the novel, now EU novel, Luke Skywalker in the Shadows of Mindor, which was kind of fun. I mean, it was a lot of it was kind of a direct lift from Lee Brackett novels, honestly. But the framing device was that, after the rebellion took down the Empire, maybe even before that, it may have been just like after the Battle of Yavin, right? The galaxy found out who Luke Skywalker was and who Han Solo was and all that. And they became like huge celebrities, not huge celebrities, but, people started writing books about them and making holoplays about them. And, all of this was like fictional. These weren't, within the Star Wars universe, someone would say like, hey, I want to make a TV show about Luke Skywalker. But then none of the things that happened on the Luke Skywalker TV show were the things that the real Luke Skywalker in the Star Wars universe did. Right. So it was like this kind of meta thing. And that was kind of like fun, that idea that there were these legends, these stories running around about Luke Skywalker and Han Solo and Leia, all that, of like, hey, we didn't do any of this, but like we became part of the popular culture, the Star Wars universe popular culture, so that, someone on Coruscant is just producing really cheap holodrama, old TV serials based on the Luke Skywalker that exists within the Star Wars. Like, that's kind of a interesting idea. And so, yeah, having this Legends of Luke Skywalker, these like rumors about what he was up to, it just reminds me of that a little bit. And I was like, oh, it's certainly going to be different. It's going to be more of this like Canterbury Tales kind of thing, where everyone's sitting around a campfire and, well, I met Luke Skywalker once, and here's the crazy thing he did. It's going to be more like that, but it's sort of a fun conceit. At this point, like I said, it seems like they're just trying to have it both ways with the way they write these stories.
Yeah, I think they see a demand for more Luke Skywalker, but they also don't want to paint themselves into a corner creatively with the movies. I think they are holding back because of something about, and I could be wrong, because every time I always think that like, oh, the reason they're holding back is there's going to be this big reveal, like this, like the best example I could always think of is the prequels, and how one of the big questions the thing that always I was curious about was this whole concept of the Jedi turning into a ghost, and why some did and some didn't, and how some people could just disappear and some people just die, and they never really did that. I mean, like literally in the last 10 minutes of Revenge of the Sith, and I'm like, finally, I see that, Yoda's got tears in his eyes. He's going to explain it all. And it's like, he doesn't, he goes, oh, you have more training and all this. I'm like, oh, you're kidding me. And then it's like ancillary material. And still, I feel like, I've never enjoyed the Clone Wars take on it either. So much so I don't even remember what their explanation was. But it's like that thing where it's like, well, don't send me to ancillary material for like big questions of the movie. But, and I understand they're not really doing that in this. It's just, again, it's the halting thing where they can like, again, it's all fake, but I think to myself, well, if you're not even going to make the overture that we're going to try to create a big story with a lot of information, if you're like, no, we're intentionally telling you up front that can just throw this stuff is probably all BS in the grand scheme of things. We're going to throw anything out that contradicts it. To me, it's like, well, if you're going to go forward that way, I'm not interested. I'm not gonna pick this up, and I don't really care, because then I guess I reserve the right to say, okay, none of it is important because you said it wasn't. So
right. Why would I buy this book if you just
yeah, I mean, and again with the Phasma book, it's kind of like I'll have to read some reviews on that. I don't know, because it's like I was I was more disappointed in the Thrawn book than a lot of others, and a lot of it.
Well, good news.
Why?
Well, we'll talk about that in a minute.
Oh,
we'll
okay.
talk about that in a second.
No, just the idea that, and there was that whole subplot where it was like, I forget her name. She's on Rebels. She's the one that looks like Cate Blanchett, that character. It's like she was such a huge part of the.
Oh yeah.
With the family of the miners, like so
Governor
Price. And that. She could have probably been in one of these anthology. Her whole story could have been its own little story. I don't feel like it worked as part of the Thrawn thing. I would have liked more Thrawn, but again, I think that's not Timothy Zahn's fault. I think a lot of that, his hands were pretty tied on telling this story, and I don't think he had very much freedom to do much with his creation. So I feel like the Phasma thing is kind of setting up for that like thing where it's going to these explanations. Well, I guess my point is like I really wanted that Thrawn book to be kind of like what Price's story was, and you find her motivations, her experience, what turns her into Price. I was hoping we were going to have that in Thrawn, and it was really strange that she was the person going through all the changes in his book.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost feel like it's just going to be kind of like one of these Phasma things where it's going to be like, well, we already know she's bad, so it's going to be somebody else's story in the book is going to be the transformational story, and Phasma is going to...
Mm-hmm.
She's going to be pretty much the same person we start with in the book, and the one that, because she's so bland, because there's nothing to her in the movies, they can pretty much attach whatever they want. And they're not going to probably deal with it in the movie, so it's just going to be this... not going to mean anything, and that's kind of what I'm like, these origin books are already kind of like, they're not pleasing me. But anyway, what were you going to say about Thrawn?
Well, so Marvel is adapting the recent Thrawn novel into a comic, so you will get to relive all of Governor Price's exciting adventures in comic form.
Oh, boy. Why? Do people not read
anymore? I don't know.
People don't read?
That's a good question. I don't know.
People wanted to draw Coruscant?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's that there is some demand for more Thrawn content, but not a ton. But they know that like there's a dedicated audience for Thrawn at the same time who will just buy Thrawn stuff, and so... like, well, rather than come up with a new thing, what if we adapt it? I don't know. I mean, it's now that we have, the Rebels version of him, we kind of have a picture in our mind of what he looks like, in that style. They can go ahead and illustrate him on the comic page. It also doesn't really strike me as like a story that fits the comics. Like there's not a lot of action in it. Right. A lot of talking in that book. And there are a lot of time jumps, where I can't even remember the name of the low ranking Imperial officer who's assigned to help Thrawn, right? Like he's first season
Eli
ensign.
Vanto.
Yeah, so he's like an ensign or whatever for a long time, and then he jumps up to like lieutenant governor, and then he jumps up to like something else. But in the book, that like it's been a month or like 3 months since that happened. When you get to that section, so there are a lot of time jumps. There's a lot of talking. There's not a lot of action. There are space battles, but like you see them from the bridge, right? You see them through Vanto's eyes or through Thrawn's eyes. The Governor Price storyline, honestly, like I don't even know if that would be in the comic, just because that one has even more talking in it, right? Like that's not even talking, but that's just a lot of that is Governor Price's kind of internal monologue, internal thoughts that I don't know how you translate that to a comic book and make it interesting. And you're right, comics and graphic novels can be lots of different things. They don't have to be full of action. But if you're going to make like a Star Wars comic, I feel like there's going to be an expectation that there's a certain level of action in it that I just don't think this book really meets.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that's the thing, and I can't. There is some precedent because they did do the original Thrawn trilogy as comics. Although I didn't enjoy that, I didn't buy any of them mainly because it's like I kind of already intimately knew the books, and I didn't really need. Everything was just would contradict my. Like Talon. I'm thinking like especially like Talon Card. Like when they had him depicted in the comic, he looks like the bass player of Molly Hatchet or something. And they're just like, wait a second, this is not. All it did was lessen the experience for me. And also, the Thrawn book is out. Everybody who wanted to read it is going to read it. It's like there's so many other cool things that they could really expand on that would. Like that they're never, Thrawn's going to show up in season 4 of Rebels. So we're going to have tons of Thrawn content. But, why don't they do like a mini series about Saw Gerrera? I mean, they kept pushing that character so much, I forget what his group are called. He has a name for him, but it's like, they got such a small, I was so excited about that, with Beezer Fortuna and all these like great creatures. And I thought, oh, we're going to see it. There's going to be a lot of interaction with them. And they were all kind of background characters except for in 1 or 2 sequences. And I think that would be a perfect thing where if they wanted to do like a fun mini series instead of trying to let's just do an adaptation of a book that most people have already read anyway. Let's go out and get some of those interesting stories. I mean, I would think because of the alien visuals, they'd almost work better as a comic than, say, like one of these anthology books that we talk about. But yeah, I guess it's just marketing. They're just like, well, we need to have. It's kind of like, why are they still doing the comic adaptions of the movies? And they come out like 6-8 months later. It's kind of like, oh, well, there's a market for them, so we're just going to do them, not because it's a great thing, but just because we know people will buy them. Yeah,
and they've said a lot lately, Lucasfilm has, about how the story group, it's not exercising like complete control over everything, all that, but I do wonder how they develop these different ideas for the different pieces, right? Like, how do they decide if something's a comics idea versus a novel idea, or do they even make that decision? Is it that, the comics division, Marvel or whoever's in Lucasfilm working on the comic side comes up with an idea and they pitch it and they go, yeah, sure, without ever considering, well, maybe that idea would be better for a video game or a book or a short story or something like that. Because, I mean, especially hearing the Phasma book described as it is, that seems much more right for me to be a comic. Especially even with the, jumping back and forth to her childhood, like it just seems more visual to me. And like that would be a good comic, especially because Phasma took on a slightly larger role in the Poe Dameron comic, right? Like now give her own comic to kind of really show how she got to that point.
Right.
Now as for Saw Gerrera's group, I mean, they're going to be in the Battlefront 2 novel.
Oh.
And that's part of the story behind Battlefront 2, which is that...
Is that coming out like in a week or something like that?
It actually came out yesterday.
Oh, okay.
I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but Christy Golden has been doing interviews for it. So the book takes place 4 years before the events of the game, right? So we've talked about this, I think, but they added this story element to the game, and so you play as this Imperial officer, intelligence officer, Iden Versio, I think is her name. And so the book takes place 4 years before the events of the game, and it's where we're really introduced to the characters. 2 of them already know one another, while the other 2 are new to the squad, because it's called Inferno Squad. It's about these 4, Imperial spies, basically. We see a little bit of them in their native environments before they answer the call, and then we see them going off on some of their first few missions together, getting their feet underneath them, and learning how to work together as a team. They're then given their pivotal mission, which is to take down and recover information from the remnants of Saw Gerrera's partisans, which we saw in Rogue One. So basically, I've read one review of the book so far. So the main characters are this Imperial Inferno Squad, but they go undercover in Saw Gerrera's group, and so we'll kind of be seeing maybe I'm sure a few of the characters that we see in Rogue One will be there, but I imagine there's probably a lot of turnover in Saw Gerrera's group too. We'll be introduced to some new characters, but we'll kind of be seeing them through the eyes of these Imperial characters. So, I think, for the comic, maybe that's why they held off, because we were going to get more of that story through this book and the video game. And I think too, I remember this, that there's going to be like a Jyn Erso book, again, either a middle reader or a young adult book, that it may already be out or it's coming out, about her, prior to Rogue One. And so that may include some Saw Gerrera stuff in it. So yeah, I agree. I would like to see more of those people, and Rebel Rising was the name of the book I was thinking of, which came out back in May. So whether we see even more of that in the future, or if kind of this is it for now. I mean, because that's the other thing too, is once this Han Solo movie comes out, are they going to move on from any Rogue One tie-in material, right? How much of this stuff are we going to get further and further down the line? Because the movie's out there, in theory, they could spin out Rogue One related material as long as they want for anyone who likes Rogue One, right? And so if you're a huge fan of Rogue One, great, we're going to keep making material for you. But at the same time, if they're going to keep putting out movies, they need to keep people's interest in the most current thing. And so they don't want people to keep buying Rogue One books and comic books and stuff instead of whatever the new movie is. So yeah, I don't know how much more Saw Gerrera partisans, and I guess Saw Gerrera is also going to be in season 4 of Rebels, right? So maybe we'll see a few of his partisans here and there.
Do we know that? We're gonna get? Do we know that? We've heard that he's going to be in season 4.
Yeah, well, they've shown him.
Oh, okay. Wow, I didn't know that.
They showed some clips or screenshots from season 4, I think, and he's going to be back. I don't know that he'll be in every episode, but he'll be back a few times, I think. Right. So is this, do we have another, 6 months basically to get our Rogue One tie-in fix, and then we're cut off, or are we going to keep seeing, Jyn Erso and Saw Gerrera books, 3 years from now? I don't know.
Yeah, it's an interesting time. Like I said, I'm not a huge fan of the way that they're doing the books, but I mean, I understand they're trying to maintain the mystery of things and keep people interested without like spoiling. I mean, that was a luxury afforded to the prequel era, where everybody knew that those movies were going to end up with twins being born and people, Jedi's dying off and stuff. So they didn't need to really like hide that so much. It was just the more details of it. And so they're kind of, they are trying to suspend a lot of the information. So people just, apparently everything that's in The Last Jedi is going to be such a shocker to us that we're going to be thankful that they didn't spoil it for us in advance or whatever, At least that's what the official line is that we're gonna. It's this ain't your father's Star Wars. I don't know.
That's right.
Do we want to talk about the video game stuff to wrap up the show?
I think that's actually a pretty good. So which video game stuff?
Just
do you want to talk
the
about?
Hennig stuff, or do you mean?
Yeah, if we can do it quickly.
Yeah.
So the Amy Hennig game, it's been out, people have known about it for years. They're still working on it. A while ago, some more information came out, but we just haven't talked about it here. So it's nicknamed Project Ragtag, because it's a ragtag group of people. I guess previously she had talked about how, making a game where there's not just one central character, where it's more of the team and the multiple perspectives, has been something they've been doing. So, right, it's a ragtag team, but there's a main character who's nicknamed Dodger because he dodged the draft into Imperial service, and so he's now part of the criminal underworld. The game takes place just prior to the events of Empire Strikes Back. Dodger is from Alderaan, and so after the events of A New Hope, they created this survivors list of people who were from Alderaan but didn't die in the Death Star incident. I don't know what you would attack. I don't know what you would call that. So his name popped up on a list of Alderaan survivors, and so now he's wanted by the Empire. At the same time, he finds out that whatever was left over of Alderaan, there's something in it that the Empire is using to build a weapon or something, I guess minerals in the core of the planet or something like that they're using. They're extracting from the remnants of Alderaan, and so he has to do two things, right? He has to get himself off of the list of Alderaanian survivors, and he's going to try to do that by bribing Imperial officials. And he also is trying to figure out what the Empire is going to do with this stuff from Alderaan and the weapon, and confront what happened to Alderaan. So in order to get the money, he has to work for Jabba the Hutt, become a smuggler, do whatever, working for the criminal underworld. And this is tricky because the Empire in this period of time is also making a push further into the Outer Rim, which is going to disrupt what's happening in the criminal underworld. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty about how they're going to keep operating. Also he's apparently trying to solve the murder of his mentor. That was also kind of thrown into this article, halfway down. They're and he's trying to solve his mentor's murder. And they're like, who, what? Okay. He's going to be armed with a light whip / grapple stick and a blaster. His signature move is to activate the light whip / grapple stick and ensnare his enemies with his left hand, and then blast them into oblivion with the pistol in his right hand. I'm quoting the thing. So there are a lot of variants on these weapons. Either way, he uses his, quote, magic lasso and his pistol to stop his enemies cold. So there's a lot going on in that update. Robert, I mean, you've kind of been looking forward to this. I've since I don't play video games, I'm not going to be playing this, but I thought I've been keeping up with it. I've been interested to see where it goes. So how do you feel about the direction this is moving in?
I was interested, and then all of a sudden at this, when the term magic lasso, which, in his grapple stick or whatever, it makes you go, oh yeah, this is going to be a very self-aware kind of game. It's probably going to be a linear action platformer. I was kind of hoping for something slightly like an open world RPG where you have a central world, and then you can take on tasks and you can finish them at your leisure. You could either I'm going to follow this storyline all the way to the end, and then I'm going to go back and do this one. But the best example I could see from all the feel I'm getting, and even some of the little imagery I've seen, that this is very much in the genre of the game that kind of Amy Hennig had really got on people's radars for, which is the Uncharted series, which is a kind of platformer thing about a guy who, it's like he's an Indiana Jones type character, and he goes into all these great historical treasure hunts, and his whole thing is that he's got a gun and he's got a grappling hook, which I don't, or some kind of rope, because a lot of it is climbing up buildings and sneaking around people. And it was kind of funny because she was involved in the first 3 of these, and then she very famously left Naughty Dog, which is the name of the company that made the Uncharted games, early in the production of the 4th one. And a lot of people were kind of thinking like, oh, it's going to be garbage. She's leaving for Star Wars. She's taking all the talent. But the funny thing is that the 4th Uncharted game I just finished, and I would say it was a fantastic game, and I don't think she was involved in it at all. And but the funny thing is the game she's making has a lot of, it just kind of sounds like Uncharted with the Star Wars skin on it, is my point.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing is that this Uncharted 4, I felt that they were actually able to elevate the storytelling to a new level. It's like the game, like you think by the time they make the 4th of something, they'd be like, all right, they've milked all the great ideas out of this. And they didn't. They actually were able to come up with something I would consider, like, it's hard to explain for people who don't play games, but the best analogy I could use is when I finished this Uncharted 4, it was kind of akin to finishing like a really good pot boiler kind of paperback that you picked up on a whim. And you're like, well, this didn't change my life. It doesn't change how I think about the world. But it was like, man, that was a really well told story. And it's just funny that she was, when she left Naughty Dog, they assumed that meant that they were, oh, well, the 4th Uncharted is just going to be this crass kind of, quick cash in to try on the series while all the creative people have already left. And that it's not how it came to be. But the funny thing is, again, what the number one thing that they're presenting is, oh, it's a platformer and he has a whip and he can grab people. And it's like, well, it almost like you took your ideas for Uncharted and you took it over to Star Wars, and you're like, you're not really, I mean, there's not a long tradition except for maybe a quick thing with Boba Fett of people like lassoing people and kind of nabbing. I mean, and obviously it's a conceit for the game, because the pictures I've seen it's like this Dodger character is crawling underneath an alcove on a high cliff, and he's trying to sneak around troopers. So it's obviously going to be a lot of platforming. I mean, I'm interested. I'm just not, super excited. The same way I'm not super excited about the multiplayer for Battlefield 2. I'm actually interested about the single player much more so. So it's like, again, I think this thing's still even a year out from its official announcement, because usually these kind of things don't even come out till June at E3, and we just had E3, so we're probably not going to be seeing any of this for like another 10 months or 11 months. Yeah. So it's kind of, there's a lot of, there could be a whole lot more to it. And I'm really hoping there is. It's not going to be kind of like, oh yeah, it's a 12-hour platformer game. And, it'll have like, even one of the ways that they kind of gussy up these games is like, well, we threw on some multiplayer and people love that. Well, now that you've got Battlefront, kind of eating up all that time, I'm sure this game won't have a lot of multiplayer to it. So there's going to be a lot of weight on them getting the single player of this right. Whereas even if the single player on Battlefront 2 isn't great, they're going to have this huge, expansive multiplayer for people to keep returning to. So I hope that Amy Hennig didn't put all of her eggs in one basket and trying to make a quick Star Wars style platformer. But like I said, I feel like she's not quite ready to announce it yet. And so that probably means a lot of good things.
I think, didn't they also have to like revise some of it a while back? Like they were headed down one path and then something happened.
Yeah, it was going to be a tie-in for the Han Solo movie, I think.
Yeah.
And again, that happens in game production, and it has happened in the history of Lucasfilm, because they had a game that they actually showed at E3 that got canceled. So And George actually had a lot to do with George showing up one day and saying, I think Boba Fett should be in this game. And they're like, we're 75% done. I think we need Boba Fett. And while they were fixing it, Disney bought Lucasfilm and it got scrapped.
Right.
So, I mean, we're not going to have that happen. It's just, my only concern is that this is probably going to be much less of a game than we really think it is. And it's just a matter of they had to change a lot of the game because of them maybe not wanting to tie the game to a movie that they're not quite sure is going to do well. So,
yeah,
I don't know. Again, there's a lot of variables out there. I'm definitely interested, and as I'm with every Star Wars game, because really Star Wars games are my kind of traditionally when I was younger was my vector for making choices about, like, I'm going to buy a console. I mean, I bought a Nintendo 64 to play Shadows of the Empire. I bought, a GameCube to play the Rogue Squadron game. So it's, so I'm always going to be interested, but again, there's not a lot out there. So
yeah,
I think that's probably a good place to tie it up for the week.
Yeah.
I think we covered a lot. I feel like
we did.
We had all these technical issues before we even got started, so we're kind of like exasperated at this point. If you want to reach out and talk to us, hosts, HOSTS at talkingbirdcast.com. That is our email address. We have a Twitter at Talking Birdcast. We have a website, www.talkingbirdcast.com. We have an Amazon we have an Amazon affiliate link at www.talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon, and we always appreciate it when you use that. I think that's it for the week. For Talking Birdcast, I have been Robert Zachary.
I'm still John Llewellyn.
Thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you and your children. That was the joke from last week nobody got. I was making a C-3PO joke, and then I realized I felt like nobody got it. The joke is that he doesn't say with your family. He says, may the Force be with you and your children, which sounds super creepy.
It does.
Thanks for listening.
These and other toys and games in Kenner's Star Wars collection are sold separately. Batteries are not included. May the Force be with you and your children.